Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction inspired by true emotional experiences. Names, characters, and events have been changed or dramatized for narrative purposes. The content deals with sensitive topics such as infidelity and family struggles, and may be emotionally triggering for some readers. Reader discretion is advised. I always believed my life was the picture of happiness: a loving husband, a bright and cheerful son, and a home filled with laughter. On the outside, everything seemed perfect. I often caught myself feeling grateful for the family I had built, imagining how lucky I was to have this little world that was mine and mine alone. My husband, Jason, and I had been together for over a decade. We met in college, fell in love quickly, and married 2 years later. Our son, Ethan, was the light of our lives. At 7 years old, he was full of energy, curiosity, and an innocent kind of wisdom that only a child can possess. Every morning, I'd watch him race through the kitchen, backpack bouncing on his small shoulders, ready for school, and my heart would swell with pride. Jason worked as an architect, often busy with his projects, but he always made time for us. Weekends were family time. We'd take Ethan to the park, have dinner together, and share stories before bed. That sense of routine and stability was comforting, a constant I counted on in a world full of uncertainties. I prided myself on being a devoted mother and wife, believing that my family was my safe harbor. I kept our home warm and welcoming, filled with photographs of smiling faces and memories frozen in time. If anyone asked about our life, would have confidently said we were happy, content, and in love. But beneath the surface of this perfect image, something was quietly shifting, something I wasn't ready to see. Sometimes, when I glanced at Jason, I noticed a fleeting look, a shadow of distraction, or maybe weariness, that didn't quite fit with the man I knew. But I pushed the feeling aside, telling myself it was just work stress or the usual fatigue of adult life. After all, marriage wasn't always easy, and everyone had bad days. Ethan, meanwhile, was my anchor. His innocent laughter and bright eyes reminded me every day why I held my family so dear. He was my heart outside of myself. I loved watching him grow, learning new things, and exploring the world with wonder. His trust in me was absolute, and I promised myself I would never break it. At night, after Ethan was asleep, I often sat alone in the quiet of our living room, thinking about how fortunate we were. The future felt open, full of possibilities, vacations to plan, milestones to celebrate, and a lifetime of memories to make. I clung to the hope that our little family bubble would stay unbroken. Little did I know, that hope was about to be tested in ways I could never have imagined. At first, the changes were so subtle that I barely noticed them. Jason was always busy, but lately, the late nights at the office had increased. He'd come home tired, quieter than usual, and sometimes his eyes seemed distant, as if his mind was somewhere far away. I tried not to read too much into it, telling myself that work stress could wear anyone down. But the small things began to add up. There was the evening he forgot our usual dinner plans without explanation. The time his phone rang, and he stepped outside to answer, lowering his voice just enough to make me curious. And the nights when I'd wake up to find his side of the bed empty, only to learn he'd taken work calls or needed fresh air. I wondered if I was imagining it, if my instincts were simply playing tricks on me. I kept telling myself, Jason loves us. He wouldn't do anything to hurt this family. Still, a tiny knot of unease started to grow in my chest, one that I couldn't ignore. One afternoon, Ethan was sitting on my lap, reading a book he had just brought home from school. His small fingers traced the words as he read aloud, stumbling over difficult parts but determined to get through it. The warmth of his breath on my cheek and the soft rhythm of his voice filled me with a deep sense of comfort. That's when I first noticed the way he looked at me. His eyes were steady, but there was something unusual in them, a question, a confusion that I didn't understand. It was a look I hadn't seen before, and it made me pause. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, tilting his head. I forced a smile and hugged him tighter. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a little tired." He nodded, but the doubt lingered in his gaze, and I knew he sensed something was off. My heart ached because I wanted to protect him from whatever storm might be brewing, but I didn't even fully understand it myself. As days passed, Jason's distance grew. He was still physically present, but emotionally, he was slipping away from me. We stopped sharing the little things, the jokes, the glances, the warmth that once filled our home. Our conversations became practical and brief. One evening, while Ethan was asleep, I found myself scrolling through Jason's phone by accident. I wasn't proud of it, but something inside me needed to know if my fears had any basis. I stopped at a message preview that made my stomach twist, a flirtatious text from a woman I didn't recognize. I quickly locked the phone and sat in silence, my mind racing. Was this a mistake? Was I reading into something harmless? But the feeling in my gut told me otherwise. A terrible truth was beginning to unravel, and I was scared of what it meant for our family. I wanted to confront Jason, but I held back. I was afraid of breaking the fragile peace, afraid of hurting Ethan, afraid of what I might discover if I opened that door. Instead, I decided to watch closely, to keep my eyes open for any more signs. I told myself I was doing this for Ethan, to protect him and keep our family intact, no matter what. But deep down, I knew I was holding on to a hope that might soon be shattered. Days passed, but the unsettling feeling inside me only grew stronger. I tried to focus on Ethan, his laughter, his school projects, his endless questions about everything. He needed my full attention, and I wanted to be the strong mother he deserved. Yet, every time Jason walked through the door, I felt a cold distance between us, like a silent wall was being built brick by brick. One evening, I decided to stay up later than usual, pretending to read a book while really waiting for Jason to come home. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock. I heard his footsteps at the door, but instead of greeting me or Ethan, he headed straight for the bedroom and shut the door behind him. Then, his phone buzzed on the bedside table. I could hear the faint vibration, followed by hushed whispers that sent chills down my spine. I strained to listen but couldn't make out the words clearly. Still, it was enough to deepen the pit growing in my stomach. That night, I lay awake thinking about all the small things that didn't add up, the secretive texts, the long hours away from home, the way Jason avoided my questions. I felt trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The next morning, as I was preparing breakfast, I accidentally caught a glimpse of Jason's phone screen when it lit up on the kitchen counter. A message preview popped up, and my heart sank. "Can we meet tomorrow? I miss you." I wanted to scream, to confront him right then and there, but I swallowed my pain and kept quiet. I didn't want Ethan to see his parents fighting or hear harsh words that would scar him. Instead, I buried my fear behind a smile and carried on, pretending everything was normal. At the same time, I noticed Ethan staring at me more often than usual. His innocent eyes held a quiet sadness that I couldn't explain. One afternoon, while helping him with his homework, he looked up and asked, "Mom, why do you look so sad sometimes?" His question hit me like a punch to the gut. How could I protect him when he was already sensing the cracks in our family? I hugged him tightly, whispering, "Mommy's just tired, sweetie. Nothing to worry about." But as I held him, I realized that my silence was hurting him too. The secret I was keeping wasn't just breaking my heart, it was breaking his, too. I began to wonder, how long could I keep this up? How long before the truth came crashing down on all of us? With a heavy heart, I decided I needed answers. I needed to know what Jason was hiding, no matter how painful the truth might be. But I was terrified of what I would find. Would my perfect family survive this storm, or would it all come crashing down? It was a rainy Thursday evening when everything finally came crashing down. Jason had told me he would be working late again, but I sensed something was different that night. Instead of waiting anxiously, I found myself restless, pacing the house while Ethan slept upstairs. Unable to resist the growing knot of suspicion, I decided to follow him. I grabbed my coat quietly and slipped out the door, hoping I wasn't making a terrible mistake. The streets were slick with rain, the city lights blurring in the wet haze. Jason's car pulled into a dimly lit parking lot I didn't recognize. My heart pounded fiercely as I watched him get out and head towards a small cafe that was still open. From a distance, I could see him meet someone, a woman I had never seen before. They hugged briefly, then sat down close together, whispering urgently. My chest tightened with every word I couldn't hear. I wanted to turn away, to run back home and pretend I hadn't seen anything, but I couldn't move. It was like my body was frozen in place, trapped by the unbearable truth unfolding before me. When Jason leaned in and kissed the woman, all the hope I had clung to shattered. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. I felt hollow, as if the ground beneath me had disappeared. That night, I barely slept. The images of Jason with that woman haunted me, and the silence between him and me at home was deafening. I kept replaying every moment, every lie, every broken promise. I was drowning in a sea of heartbreak, unable to breathe. The hardest part wasn't just the betrayal itself, it was thinking about Ethan. How could I protect him from this pain? How could I explain that the man he adored was no longer the person I thought he was? The next morning, I watched Ethan playing in the backyard, his laughter pure and untouched by the darkness I carried inside. For a moment, I envied his innocence. I wanted to shield him forever from the storm that had settled in our family. Later that day, I confronted Jason. My voice trembled as I asked him to tell me the truth. He looked at me with guilt and exhaustion, finally admitting to the affair. The confession broke something inside me, a mixture of anger, sadness, and disbelief swirling in a painful storm. As the words spilled out, I glanced at Ethan through the window. He was staring at me, not with his usual joy, but with a strange, heavy look that made my heart shatter even more. It wasn't just my world that was breaking, it was his, too. After that confrontation, the house felt colder, as if the warmth we once shared had been stolen away by the truth. Jason and I no longer spoke except when absolutely necessary, and even then, our words were sharp and distant. But the hardest part was watching Ethan, my son, my heart, slowly changing before my eyes. It was one evening, a few days after everything came to light, when I noticed him staring at me in a way that stopped me cold. We were sitting together on the couch, trying to watch a movie, but his eyes were fixed on me, unblinking. There was something in that look, a mixture of confusion, hurt, and fear, that I had never seen before. "Mom," he said quietly, breaking the silence. "Is everything going to be okay?" The innocence in his voice shattered me. How could I tell him the truth without breaking him? How could I explain that the man he called Dad was no longer the hero in his eyes? I forced a smile and nodded, but inside, I was crumbling. I pulled him close, holding him tight as if my arms could shield him from the storm. But no matter how much I tried, I knew he was feeling the cracks in our family just as deeply as I was. Over the next few days, Ethan's behavior shifted. He became quieter, more withdrawn, and sometimes his eyes would fill with tears when he thought no one was looking. He stopped asking questions, but his stare said everything. He was trying to understand a pain too big for a child. One afternoon, I found him sitting alone in his room, hugging his favorite stuffed animal tightly. When he saw me, he didn't smile or run to me like he used to. Instead, he looked away, his face guarded. "Ethan," I whispered, kneeling beside him. "I'm so sorry you have to see this. I wish things were different." He looked at me then, his eyes full of a sadness no child should carry. "Why did Dad do this? Did I do something wrong?" My heart broke again at his words. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "No, baby. This is not your fault. Sometimes adults make mistakes, but that doesn't mean we love you any less." That night, as I lay awake watching him sleep, I felt a deep ache in my chest. The trust and innocence in Ethan's eyes were fragile now, and I feared the damage might last a lifetime. The guilt of protecting him while keeping my own pain hidden was overwhelming. I realized that the hardest part of infidelity wasn't just the betrayal between two adults, it was the invisible wounds it left on the ones who loved them most. Ethan's stare had broken my heart because it reflected the silent suffering we both shared, trapped in a family torn apart. Despite the heartbreak, I vowed to be strong for him. To help him heal, even if it meant confronting my own pain every day. Because no matter what, my son deserved to feel safe and loved, even when everything else was falling apart. The days after that painful stare were the hardest I had ever faced. Jason and I were living like strangers under the same roof, and the silence between us was thick with unspoken anger and hurt. I could barely look at him without feeling the sharp sting of betrayal, and yet, part of me still wanted answers, needed closure to understand why everything fell apart. One evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, I finally gathered the courage to sit Jason down for a serious talk. My voice trembled as I asked him the questions that had been haunting me for weeks. Why? How could you do this to us, to me, to Ethan? Jason's eyes were heavy with regret. He looked away, unable to meet my gaze at first, then finally whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." The words felt hollow, but I clung to them because it was the closest thing to an explanation I had. The man I thought I knew, the man who promised forever, had broken that promise, and I was left trying to pick up the pieces. As we talked, the weight of everything settled over us. There were tears, anger, apologies, and silences so deep they echoed louder than any words. Jason admitted that his affair had been more than just a mistake, it was a symptom of something wrong in our marriage, something we had ignored for too long. For the first time, I saw his pain mirrored in my own. We were two people lost, hurting each other and ourselves. But the hardest part was knowing our son was caught in the middle. The next morning, Ethan was different, quieter and more distant. I caught him watching us from the hallway with wide eyes, as if trying to understand the new tension filling our home. He was too young to grasp the full truth, but old enough to feel the pain. I tried to reassure him, telling him that Mommy and Daddy still loved him very much. But I wasn't sure if my words reached him. The innocence in his eyes was fading, replaced by a cautiousness that broke my heart every time I saw it. In the days that followed, I arranged for us to see a family counselor. I knew we needed help, not just to save our marriage, but to protect Ethan from the emotional fallout. The sessions were difficult, we uncovered wounds we hadn't known were there and faced the reality of what we had become. It wasn't a quick fix, and the road ahead was uncertain. Some days were filled with hope, others with despair. But through it all, I held on to one truth: Ethan's well-being was my priority. No matter what happened between Jason and me, I had to be strong for him. Every time I looked into my son's eyes, I remembered that painful stare, the one that broke my heart and made me realize the true cost of betrayal. And that gave me the strength to keep fighting, for him, for us, for whatever future we could still build together. After weeks of raw emotions and painful conversations, I realized that healing was not going to be easy, especially when it came to rebuilding trust with Jason and helping Ethan feel safe again. The affair had left deep cracks in our family, and I wasn't sure if those cracks could ever fully be repaired. But I knew one thing for sure: I had to try. For Ethan's sake, for my own, and maybe, just maybe, for Jason too. Jason and I started attending counseling sessions regularly, individually and together. The therapist encouraged us to be honest, to confront the pain rather than hide from it. Some days, the truth was too much to bear. Arguments would flare, tears would fall, and sometimes, silence would take over like a heavy fog. But slowly, we began to open up. Jason talked about feeling disconnected from me, the loneliness he'd buried beneath work and distraction. I shared my feelings of betrayal, fear, and heartbreak. It was hard and raw, the kind of honesty that leaves you vulnerable and exposed. Ethan, meanwhile, seemed to respond to the small changes around him. I made it a point to spend more one-on-one time with him, playing games, reading stories, and just being present. His smiles returned, even if they were a little quieter than before. The painful stare that had haunted me was less frequent, replaced with moments of warmth and trust. One afternoon, Ethan surprised me by drawing a picture of our family, a stick figure version of Jason, me, and him, holding hands under a bright sun. It was simple, but it filled me with hope. Despite everything, my son still believed in us. Jason also made efforts, small but meaningful, like showing up for Ethan's school events, helping with bedtime, and being more open with his feelings. It wasn't perfect, and some days were harder than others, but it was progress. At night, I sometimes caught Jason looking at me with a mixture of regret and hope. We didn't know what the future held, but we both wanted to find a way forward. The road to healing was slow and uncertain, but it was a road we had to walk, together or apart, for Ethan's sake. As a mother, my heart was still fragile. The scar left by Jason's betrayal would never fully disappear, but I was learning to carry it with grace. I was learning that love could sometimes mean forgiveness, even when it hurts. And I was learning that the broken pieces of a family could sometimes be mended, if only we were willing to try. Months passed, and life slowly began to regain some of its normalcy. The raw pain hadn't disappeared, it never would, but I learned to live with it. The betrayal that once shattered my heart had changed me, but it hadn't defeated me. Jason and I were still figuring things out. We weren't the same couple we used to be, and maybe that was okay. The cracks in our marriage were there, but instead of hiding from them, we faced them together. The counseling helped us communicate better, to be honest about our fears and hopes. Ethan's laughter returned more fully now, filling the house with warmth that had been missing for so long. His trust in us was fragile but growing, and every smile was a reminder of why I kept fighting. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Jason reached out and took my hand. His eyes held a quiet apology, but also a promise, to be better, to be present, to rebuild what had been broken. I squeezed his hand gently, knowing that forgiveness wasn't something I gave freely, but something I was learning to give, for him, for Ethan, and for myself. I also realized that healing wasn't about forgetting or pretending the pain didn't exist. It was about accepting the past, learning from it, and choosing how to move forward. I caught Ethan staring at me once again, but this time, his eyes were filled with hope, not confusion. That look told me we were on the path to healing, slow, uncertain, but real. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, and there would be days when the pain felt overwhelming. But I was no longer alone. We were no longer broken beyond repair. For my son, for our family, I was ready to keep fighting, not because everything was perfect, but because love, even when tested, was worth it. And sometimes, that was enough to mend a broken heart.